So we've been talking about the interview conversation, what happens in our teaching when we talk about the meditation experience after the meditation. And I want to consider something that's obvious, but we may also forget about it, is that we come to this process, when we come to this process, we're not blank slates. And we might have projections on each other, on what we've heard, what we hear each other saying or have said before, or how we look, or kind of other things that are kind of floating in our consciousness that day. We might have projections on the role of a teacher, that the teacher will be able to purely have your interests at heart, which is an aspiration, but not always able to attain that, or that we should have boundless kindness and curiosity, and compassion because we've been doing this a long time. Or on the teacher's part, we might even have expectations that, you've heard what we've talked about in the Dharma talks, so that you know what we mean, and you know it in the way that we know it, and forget that you're going to know things in your own unique way. So this morning I want to emphasize that there's no one right interview conversation. Each conversation is going to be different depending on different conditions, and we're not trying to get to an essence of something that happened in the meditation. Like there's one thing that meditation experience can expose, and we're trying to find it. There are multiple threads that can be followed, and though we try to pick up on what matters, we're trying to hear what matters at the moment, we're also trying to broaden the awareness of experience to things that aren't so visible. So as an observer, you are watching this interview conversation when it happens. And I think, because I've heard this over the years, is that sometimes that's a little confusing, or it can be, what are they talking about? Or what are they trying to get at in that conversation? And we as teachers may ask some things that don't quite make sense to you, or you might have heard something completely different from what a person shared with about their meditation experience. Or something else in what they shared seemed more interesting to you, and the teacher didn't even talk about that or touch upon it. The other thing is you might have some reactions to what you hear, or some ways you would want to correct it, or make a different opinion be known. But also, and I've seen this happen at the Daily Online regularly, is that you would feel akin to the person that's talking, in friendliness and compassion for them, and really deep interest in what they're sharing. So as observers, you're not blank slates either. You're participating with a various of lenses that you come to practice with, that help you make sense out of life. And we're really not asking you to put a cap over those lenses. We're asking you to become more aware of the lenses that you carry with you, those lenses of how you see the world. So while you're engaged in listening, we're also asking you to pay attention to your own thoughts and feelings that come up while you're listening to another person talk about their experience. And this is not a typical thing that we've been taught to do. It's kind of like splitting your attention, or letting your attention go back and forth, or to kind of go under a bit and not be so highly charged. And it really is a characteristic of reflective meditation that this receptive listening develops over time. On Sunday, I woke up with a Robert Frost poem in my mind, and in my mind he only wrote one poem, because I don't know the other ones, The Road Not Taken. And it's kind of been working on me since Sunday morning. So I would like to interview myself about the poem, my meditation, and use this as a kind of way to show or engage in receptive listening. Because when you interview, when there's an interview conversation, it really becomes a focal point. Like we're all paying attention to that. Again, in a variety of ways we're paying attention, but it is a way that something's on the table and we're ready to listen to it. And often meditation sittings, they have some kind of poetry-like characteristics in that poems don't always make sense right away, that there's, things that are in there that are more figurative or imaginative or imagery or sense-based. And they're not, like first drafts of poems, they're not polished or brought together to be a presented piece. They're more something in the works. So here's my interview conversation. In my meditation, the poem came to me as walk your own path, be true to yourself, and that will make all the difference. And I want to use it in a Dharma talk. So I start thinking about a Dharma talk, but then I remember the poem, it's titled as The Road Less Traveled. And I think that's not the right title. I'm not sure. So I look it up and I reread the poem. This is my interview self. How did that go for you? Very simple question. I see more both ands in the poem. The poem is both about being true to yourself and not being true to yourself, about making choices and not making choices, about regrets and not regrets. And I forgot all about the stanza where the poem talks about both paths being equally fair and equally worn and equally passed by, and that they were more the same. I remembered them as being very different paths and choosing a path that was less popular. So in my Dharma talk, I was going to weave, reflective meditation is the path less traveled because it's not as popular. But now I can't do that. Memory is a really funny thing. So I interview myself. You seem excited by this, forgetting the actual words of the poem, rather than judging yourself for it. I was, because I looked it up and it led me to really look more deeply at what was niggling at me, to help me articulate something that I knew, but I hadn't really focused on, that had been working on me, something I'd been circling. And this is it, this for me at the moment, a provisional kind of insight. You can't always objectively see which path is better, which choice is better at the forefront. You have to walk it to see it. So I felt really excited by that insight. And I'm going to end my interview here because we often end when we have a little insight about something that happened in our meditation. So in light of receptive listening, what's the takeaway for you when you listen to an interview? You may have a different relationship with the poem, and you don't have to stick with this in your meditation, but these are just some of my prompts. How did it strike you? And there's lots of room for interpretations. And basically, we weren't looking for an answer in that interview conversation. And it might have looked different had Bill interviewed me, had Janet interviewed me, had somebody else, Susie, interviewed me. And really what I wanted to model along with receptive listening is that the interview conversation goes on. It continues for us internally, and that we do start to become our own interviewers. Our own conversation continues, and we ask ourselves questions that really matter to us. So I will end here with this.